Welcome to Real American Ghosts, the place where your nightmares become reality. Sit back and turn out the lights and listen to some real ghost encounters. And remember, don't look behind you.
We think of our homes as a safe haven for our families, but sometimes what should be a safe place can be a place of terror. In most cases, you can get away. But what if you can't? What if you have to face that fear, even if you don't want to? That's the case with this story. A couple live in a house that to this day is continually filled with uncertainty. Even though no one has been hurt, they still at times witness things that leave them very nervous and scared. I live in Midland, Michigan, and I grew up here. My wife and I have been married for 24 years, and we raised 2 sons. We have lived in our current house for about 12 years now, and from the first day we moved in, we had very strange things happening. There have been so many I can't possibly cover all of them in this email. But if you would like, I can send you more in the future. The first day that we were moving in, I was upstairs setting up the bed in the master bedroom when I started to hear a woman singing. At first I thought it was my wife, but then I realized I heard her talking to the boys outside. It sounded as if it was coming from the bedroom down the hall. So I walked towards the bedroom, and as I did, I could tell it was getting louder as I got closer. I reached the door and could clearly hear a woman singing and humming in the room. I must admit I was spooked, and I really didn't want to open the door, but I knew I had to, and as soon as I did, it stopped. I walked in the room and it was noticeably colder in there, but no one was there, so I turned to walk out of the room when I heard a woman giggle. It was plain as day, just like the singing. I left the room fast and went downstairs and outside and lit up a cigarette. I guess I looked a little shaken because my wife said, "You look like you've just seen a ghost." I looked at her and I said, "No, but I heard one." I think she thought I was kidding at first, and she laughed and I just looked at her. She said, "You're not serious, are you?" And I said, "Yes," and I told her what happened. Now our sons at the time were 10 and 8. So we didn't want to scare them, so we stopped talking about it. The second big incident happened about 6 months later, and our oldest boy was taking a bath. My wife was downstairs doing the dishes when she heard him screaming. She ran upstairs and into the bathroom and found him balled up in the bathtub. He told her a man came into the bathroom and said, "What are you doing in here?" She thought maybe someone had got into the house, so she ran to every room looking, but there was no one there, and they couldn't have got out because she would have passed them coming down the stairs. I'm a truck driver, so I was on the road at the time and heard about it when I called her later that night. And that scared me because I couldn't be there. One day, I had been homesick with the flu and was upstairs in bed. I had been asleep when I became aware of someone sitting down on the bed and put a cold rag on my head, and I thought my wife was doing that. But then it felt like fingers instead of a rag, and I opened my eyes, and nothing. No one was there. Another incident happened a couple years later when I was outside in the garage. The garage faces the back of the house, and I had come out to walk to the house. It was springtime, so we had the back door open. I saw an old woman standing in the kitchen. She was dressed in clothes that looked to be from the 1920s or 30s, and she was facing me, looking out the door. That stopped me in my tracks, and then she smiled at me and motioned for me to come into the house. I couldn't move. I just stood there looking at her. Then she turned and walked towards the living room, which would be to my left. I ran in the house and went into the living room, and my sons were in there watching TV. She had to have went in there, but she wasn't, and there was no other door out of there. One night my wife was asleep when she woke up and heard the shower running in the bathroom. She looked at the clock and it was around 1:30 in the morning. She knew that I was gone out of town and then thought maybe it was one of our boys. So she got up and walked towards the bathroom when she heard the door to the medicine cabinet close and the shower was still running. When someone is in the bathroom, you can see the light around the door, but there was none, which to her was really strange. Why would one of the boys be in there with the light off and the shower running and closing the medicine cabinet? That is when she got spooked. So she opened the door and the shower was on, but no one was in there. Another incident happened to our youngest son. He had come home from school, and I think he was in the 7th or 8th grade at the time, and had lost his house key. No one was home yet, and he had tried the front door, but it was locked. So he sat down on the front steps and was doing his homework, waiting for someone to come home. And then he heard the door lock click like someone had unlocked the door. So he got up, and sure enough, the door was unlocked. He went in thinking his mom was home, but soon realized no one was there. He went back outside and sat on the steps and waited for someone to come home. The last incident I want to tell you about happened just a few months ago. My wife had went out to eat with her sister, and I was working. I no longer do the long-haul driving, but sometimes I may have a run that doesn't allow me to get home until late at night. But I am home every night now. Our oldest son is in the military and our youngest is in college, so now it's just me and my wife at home. Anyway, my wife was out with her sister when she got a call from the neighbor who said she could hear someone screaming inside the house. My wife and her sister both headed to her house. Her sister knows about the things happening, and when they got home, the neighbor lady and her son was standing in her driveway. She told my wife it sounded like someone was being murdered in there. They all went in the house. The lady's son, who happened to be home on leave from the Marine Corps, was leading the way. And as always, there was nothing. I almost forgot to tell you about the black figure we've seen. My wife was in her craft room. She makes quilts and bed linen and sells them at different events. One morning she was in there and her back was to the door. She said she got this creeped out feeling that someone was watching her. When she turned around, standing in the doorway was a very tall and thin black figure. There were no features, just all black. This caused her to scream, and when she did, it just vanished. Nothing has ever tried to hurt anyone, and I guess we've become used to it, so we continue to live there. But it still is a very scary house. Going to visit grandparents for most children is a happy occasion, but when those visits are interrupted by otherworldly events, it can be very, very scary. Hi, my name is Misty, and I'm from Trenton, New Jersey. I was born and raised here, however my dad is originally from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. As a child, during the summer, I would go to my grandparents in Mississippi and stay most of the summer. When I was young, they lived in an old Victorian-style house, and it was the same house my dad and his brothers were raised in. But as my grandparents were getting older, the house was too big for them, so they decided to sell it and bought another smaller house. So the summer of 1973 was the first time I had been to this house and stayed with them. This house was a bungalow-style house with just 2 bedrooms and a fairly large backyard that was fenced in. There was a large swing set in the backyard for all the grandkids who still lived in Hattiesburg. I remember standing at the back door looking out when my grandpa walked up and said, "Surely you're not too old for that swing set, are you?" I laughed and I said no. It was always special for me to go to my grandparents and to see all my cousins. I was 13, the oldest grandchild, but my cousin Jenny was only 4 months younger than me. So when I went there, we would always hang out together. Everything was great for the first couple days, hanging out with my grandpa in his workshop, helping him build furniture, which is something he had done as a hobby for years. The first weird incident happened on the third day when my suitcase went missing. I knew that it had been at the foot of my bed that night because I had grabbed some pajamas out of it. But the next morning it wasn't there. So I went in the kitchen and asked my grandma if she knew where the suitcase was, and she said no, she hadn't seen it. My grandpa walked in and asked what was wrong, and my grandma said her suitcase is missing. But the weird part was she gave my grandpa a weird look when she said it. My grandpa said not to worry, that it would turn up, but I said I don't have anything to put on. My cousin Jenny and I was supposed to go swimming that day also, and now I didn't have a swimsuit. And it kind of made me mad because no one was offering to help me look for it. So I walked back to my bedroom, and sitting in the middle of the floor was my suitcase, open and all my clothes thrown all over the room. I ran back to the kitchen and told my grandmother what had happened, and she quickly went to the bedroom. My grandpa also went in there, and both just stood there looking at the mess. My grandma looked at him and said, "This is not good." And he said, "I know." I asked him what was not good, and they said it's nothing, not to worry about it. A little later, my cousin Jenny and I went swimming, and I told her about the incident, and that's when she said, "Well, that house is haunted. Grandma and Grandpa have seen a little girl and a man in the house." I asked her if she had seen them, and she said no, but she heard my grandpa telling her dad about it. Apparently, my grandpa had seen the man in the living room, and my grandma had seen the little girl in the bedroom I was staying in. That really scared me, and I didn't want to go back there. So Jenny asked her mom if I could spend the night, which she said yes, of course I could. It was a lot of fun that night. It took my mind off what happened, and also gave me a chance to spend some time with my aunt and uncle. The next day, my grandpa came by to pick me up, and I guess he could tell I didn't really want to go. He asked me if something was wrong, and I said no, I just like being with Jenny. And he said, well, Jenny can come and stay the night with us if she wants to. Now, Jenny wasn't all that crazy about it, but I begged her, and finally she said yes. We arrived back at my grandparents' house about 4 o'clock. My grandmother had cooked a big meal, and we had a great dinner and had fun just talking, and of course my grandpa telling his corny jokes. Jenny and I loved them so much, and even after the weirdness that happened, I wouldn't trade those moments for anything. Nothing happened that night or even the next week, so I basically put it out of my mind. I'm not sure how long it was between these incidents, but it was at least 2 weeks later, and I was sitting in my bedroom, and it was about 7 p.m. I was reading Tom Sawyer. I absolutely love those stories to this day. And then I heard someone talking. At first I thought it was Jenny because it sounded like a young girl. So I jumped up and went out into the living room. My grandparents were watching TV. I asked if Jenny was there, and they said no. Why? I told them that I'd heard a little girl talking, and Grandma said it was probably on the TV. So I went back to my room and began reading again when I heard my grandpa call my name. So I went back to the living room and I said, "Yeah, what do you want?" My grandpa said, "What?" I said, "Didn't you call me?" He said, "No." I told him I heard a male voice call my name and thought it was you. And they both looked at each other with that weird look again. I asked, "Is it the ghost?" And my grandpa just stared at me. I said, "Jenny told me this house is haunted." She said she heard you telling her dad that you've seen a girl and a man in the house. Grandma said they're not sure what it was, but that it's nothing to worry about, and not to be scared, even though I think she was a little scared. I went back to my room again and got back into bed to read. Across from the bed is a closet, and if the door was shut, it would reflect me in the bed, but the door was slightly ajar, and it was reflecting the corner to my right. I had been reading for about 10 minutes or so when I just glanced up, And I have to tell you, I've never been so scared in my life. In the mirror, standing in the corner, was a girl about 10 years old, and she was facing me. I jerked to my right, but there was nothing there. And I came off that bed and flew in the living room screaming and told my grandparents I had seen the little girl. I was crying so hard, and my grandma was trying to calm me down, but all I could say was, "I saw her, I saw her." Grandpa went in the room and came back and said, "She's not there." I couldn't stay there anymore, so my aunt and Jenny came to get me. I stayed with them until it was time for me to go home. I know that made my grandparents sad, but I was just too scared. My grandma said she understood and was very sorry I was scared. I remember when my grandpa took me to the airport to fly home, he said, "Sweetie, I'm selling that house, so it will be different next year. Please come back." I went back there for the next 3 years until my grandma passed away. Grandpa ended up moving in with another uncle and lived with them for another year until he passed away. The memories I had visiting my grandparents are some of the best of my childhood, and I'm actually tearing up writing this email. But I'll never forget seeing that little girl.